6:02, and we're gonna start moving in. We kind of did the preliminary stuff, and if we come across something where you have a question, we'll stop. And because I know last week Mark Keller asked me if when we get to chapter 6 about the Nephilim. Well, the Nephilim are interesting, and I've done some research on it myself. So when we get to that point, we'll probably spend half the night talking about the Nephilim, the different views of who they were and, what they were. But anyway, starting with the first part of the Bible, the first 5 books, it's referred to as the Torah or Hebrew law, or also it can be called the Hebrew instruction, law instruction. Pentateuch, this P-E-N-T-A is a prefix. Tuk means that it went out then. Ken, where's Ken at? I heard it cut out when I turned a certain way. But it means 5 books. And so 5-part book in the Greek, that's a Greek term to mean that. The 5 books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Genesis covers from creation to Egypt. Deliverance from Egypt and establishment of covenant is Exodus. Leviticus is laws of worship. Wilderness wanderings is a book of Numbers. I remember a preacher telling me one time, he said, some preacher said he wasn't worried about numbers in his church. And the other preacher told him, said, you need to be. God had a book named Numbers. But that ain't got nothing to do with the book of Numbers. But anyway, Deuteronomy, and there again, the first part of this word is, you see the D-E-U-T, which means second. And the last part is law, so it's the second law. So this is kind of follows up on. This is in order. No, these are not in order. When you get into here, some of them are but they're pretty much follow in order, but not like, they're not like the rest of the. This is just a collection. This was the first part of the Old Testament that the Jews had. This was their beginnings, and this covered most of their early history. And then, of course, you have the other parts when they settled into what we call the Promised Land or Holy Land. But yeah, in Genesis it is, in Exodus it pretty much follows. But Numbers and Exodus, when you read in there, you'll see some dual stories, and they're a little different. One of them covers it in different detail. Now, I'm not going to cover this, but I'll just mention it to you. When it comes to, wait a minute, I think I went too far. Let me stop up. I just want to go one spot, yeah. This documentary hypothesis, if you were in seminary and you were going to be a teacher, or if you're going to, even for your background as a preacher, what they did was through the history, and these were German authors that did a lot of this, but in Germany in the 19th century, which would be the 1800s, there was a lot of criticism about whether the Bible is God's word or not. So what critics in some of these universities that were liberal universities, and without the Catholic Church telling them they couldn't, the scholarship began to look at the scriptures from the sense of, okay, we read Genesis, we read them in their original language, we translate them to English, but were these books written later, or were they written back then? And what they did was compare the biblical texts to other known archaeological texts that they had found. And their assumption was, okay, if there were some books or literature written in this time period that these books supposedly were written, which there were very few, but they came up with a conclusion that there ought to be some similarities in the vocabulary and the structure of the language, so forth and so on. The other thing they did, and the reason this is documentary hypothesis, they looked at Genesis and they looked at, the first 5 books, and the names for Jehovah, this is Yahweh, okay, and Elohim. And what they noticed in the Hebrew text was that certain of the books never referred to God as Jehovah. That came later, but they used Elohim. And then some of the books had both. So they came up with this theory, and that's why it's called a hypothesis, this theory that there was either different authors or whoever was writing these particular texts, instead of saying it was Moses, like we believe did, that this was key because the use and how they called God by different names. And it gets really interesting because, like it says here, you have alternate authors beside Moses and stuff. And it gets interesting, and they base it on the names of God and how they appear. And it's a lot more complicated than I'm presenting here. And like I said, for us. And see, for example, this here, E1 and E2 under Elohim, this JEDP, Jehovah, Elohim, Deuteronomy, and priestly. So passages of the scripture that look like it was written by a priest, it's more detailed, it gives instructions like a priest would. They said, well, there was probably a priestly author. The sections on law, like Deuteronomy, it was an author who was very familiar with the Jewish law, and it looks like it was written by somebody like that. And then Jehovah and Elohim, the names, that also stood out as a unique difference. So, and you notice the names, Wellhausen and Holfred. These are German or other foreign names. And I'm just going to mention this in briefing. I don't think I went to, let's see, all right. This button is real sensitive. Now, the unity of the Torah, Genesis 50 through 24 through Exodus 1, 7, and the mention that is here, all he's basically saying is they tie together. They go from one to the next. So that's why the books are kind of together. And those are passages that you can see the story ending and picking up again in Exodus 1, 7. Okay? And that's all we need to know about that. All right. The first book, Genesis. It's called the Book of Beginnings. And you have two divisions. You got Genesis 1 through 11, which when I first came here, I preached chapter 1 through 11. Didn't preach every verse, but I covered some of the highlights, particularly creation. And that's just where, if I go into a new setting, that's usually where I start, because it's the beginning of everything. If you don't have Genesis, and you can quote me on this one, if you don't have the book of Genesis in our Bible, or someone tells you, well, I believe the Bible to be God's word, but I think Genesis is a myth, well, they're basically saying they don't believe in God, because Genesis is the foundation for the rest of the Bible. It's the explanation to where we are. It's the explanation for the cross. If you don't have Genesis, then there's no need for the cross. If you don't have Genesis, then, as far as how we got here and the purpose of man, because we learn all about this and the fall of man and all these things you can see here. So it's got, creation, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel, which is the biblical record of describing how we get the different, nationalities of people. Notice I didn't say races. There's really only one human race, but there's different nationalities. See, they want you to think, and I digress a little bit, but today, because of what the evolutionists have done to us back in the 1800s, they actually created this idea that they're different races. So Native Americans, African Americans, as we refer to them, they're the ones that started the idea that there's different races of people. But there's really not. It's one human race. And you know what they're finding out with genetics now? We all come from one pair of people. And the different colors of our skins, the civilizations we came from, our ancestors, we were all on this earth, as one race, and that's the human race. It was evolutionists that created the division and tried to do that to show that some races are superior to others. And that's a pride thing. And it was the evolutionists who've done that, which, by the way, to me, they're all liars. They don't know what they're talking about, but in the name of science, they seem to think they have it all together when they don't. But anyway, the Tower of Babel kind of gives us the picture where when man gets united, man turns against God. And that's basically what that story is about. Race as a whole, and then over 2,000 years here. Genesis 12 through 50, people are predominant in this section, like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. They're called patriarchs. The word patriarch means ruling fathers. So each, Jewish part from each one descendants, they're all descendants of each other. Picture yourself as a pyramid. Abraham's at the top. As long as he's living, he remains at the top. When he dies, Isaac took his place. And then, of course, Jacob took his place. And then under Jacob, he had 12 sons. And they don't mention any daughters. I'm sure they had some. Of course, we'll look at that. But in either case, the 12 tribes, and Joseph, was down at the bottom, but Benjamin's left out. He's a baby, and, he's important, but not as important as Joseph is. So he's kind of the lead patriarch. It's the family of Abraham, covers 250 years. Okay? So Genesis is really in two sections. Lisa, is he back there? Ken, do y'all hear it cutting out when I turn? Y'all don't hear that? And I think it's when it's touching my face. And I think, Ken, it's cutting in and out some to me. Now, they're not hearing it. All right, everybody do your eyes like this. Let me see. Mark, do your eyes like this so I know you're awake. All right. All right, we start with the book of Genesis, and we won't go through every verse. This is just it's a survey, so we'll go through it pretty quickly. But if you have questions, by all means, stop. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this part of Genesis answers the who of creation, the work of creation, and the what of creation. Those three questions are answered, okay? Verses 1 through 2. Heavens and the earth was unformed and unfilled. Now, when you think about that, out of nothing, the Bible says, and in the Hebrew words is ex nihilo, which is in Greek or Latin, which means completely out of nothing. See, we can't comprehend nothingness. Now, if we go into outer space, that's about as close as nothingness as you can come, because it's a complete vacuum. But if you were to microscopically look at the space itself, there's things in that space floating around, particles and things like that, particularly around the earth where the orbit, the gravity is holding that trash around the earth, floating around, stuff we put up there. But what I'm saying is, God says there was a time when there was nothing except him. And he spoke and brought everything into creation. And it says, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Now, let's kind of break this down a little bit. Unformed. So on day 1, light was created. Day 2, water and sky divided. Day 3, dry land and vegetation. So God formed everything, but there's no life, Is it dead now? I don't know, it must be my ears. I'm becoming Bobby Fulton, and that's not a good thing. But anybody got a hearing aid I can borrow? I'll bring one of Gail's hearing aids next week. All right. So it's unformed and unfilled. So God begins to fill it up. So it's there. So he creates everything first, and then he starts to fill it up. He separates with the light bearers, sun, moon, and stars, then the fish and birds, fill up the water in the sky, and on day 6, land animals, and then, of course, man. So those are the 6 days of creation. No, any question, if I can't answer it, I say, Mark, I just can't answer it. Which one? The one before that? Mm-hmm. Right. The heavens and the earth. Well, yeah. There's 2 ways of looking at it. If you see this as a summary verse, in other words, it's kind of like a headline. What you're fixing to see, the verses that follow break it down to what he did on this day. You follow me? Now, there are people out there, and I've read, excerpts. They believe there was a creation of this, and there was actually living things and even a race of people that existed. And then when he started doing the second part, they believe in what they call pre-creation story. You're right. And I don't follow. Go round, right. Well, that's why I don't speak Hebrew, and I'm, Yeah, I've come across that same stuff. I see this as in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, is more of a summary passage to say, all right, God did this. And then the next verses, he begins to break it down how that happened. And we'll see that again in chapter 2. Because you actually got two creation stories. One focuses on the, emptying and filling it up, and then and talks about man, creating man. But then when you get to chapter 2, he starts over again with Adam and Eve and says nothing about anything else. And so people are confused and say, why'd he do a kind of, well, to me, chapter 2 is kind of an expansion of what happened on the sixth day with man. It's more detailed. Because you find out woman was created too. I don't think he created men and waited 10,000 years and said, he needs a helpmeet, as the Hebrew says, But the
earth was unformed until it also said the Spirit of God moved upon the surface of the water.
Right.
The earth was about formed and void.
Mm-hmm.
Then when he said, let there be light, and there was light, that light started a lot of stuff.
Right. Well, here's the thing about light. The stars and the sun is what we see as light. The very fact that he created something, light without the sun or without the stars tells me that in physics, and I'll use physics, when I was taking nuclear physics over at Aiken Tech, I'm interested in science, but the guy brought out that the science of light is an entirely field on its own with wavelengths and stuff, just like sound. They say there's wavelengths. But anyway, and he was saying that, he didn't use a creation story, but he said it existed. It's like it wasn't there, and then all of a sudden there's these wave properties that we call light. Our eyes sense as light. Of course, we look at objects and we say, well, light comes from these, things up here or the moon and stars. The way this is written, about light was God created the whole idea of light out of nothingness. Before there was void and darkness. But he...
Okay, now explain to me, we've got stars, we see light.
Mm-hmm.
We know the speed of light, and they tell us that those stars are 100 million miles away.
Light years away.
Light years away.
Right.
And we're talking about a young Earth, 6,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing light that's, light years, billions of miles away, trillions of miles away.
Mm-hmm.
Which would say those objects are much older than 6,000 years.
Well, if we...
How do
do I explain? Well, my simple thing is I hold to the...
people that would challenge you
Yeah.
say, this can't be true, how do you respond to that?
Well, the simple answer to my understanding, all right, how do we mark time? All right, but where does the 24 hours come? Rotation of the earth. Is that true? It takes 24 hours to see that sun, to see it make its journey down, and to see it come back to the same place. We call that an hour. So that's man saying that's time. But if you look at the Bible, God says 1,000 years are like a day.
Mark, there's some stars that we see that are really not there.
Yeah, right. But but how fast does light travel? Does anybody know the number? 186,000 miles per second. Did you hear that? It's 186,000 miles per second. That's how fast light travels. That's pretty fast. In 1 second to travel that far. So when they tell you that a star is, say, 100,000 or say 1 million or 2 million light years away, then you can actually mathematically, the numbers would be, not to use the term astronomical, but if light travels 186,000 miles in 1 second, how many seconds are in a year? Well, we can figure that out. Multiply that times, So instead of saying the actual distance would be 1 followed by so many numbers, they just simply say, we shortened it up by saying that star is X number of light years away. And if you want to calculate it out to figure out how far that is. All right, now, if light travels that fast, in 6,000 years, you can turn that thing around, and in 6,000 years, how far would light go? You see what I'm getting at?
But it only mentions in Genesis, it only mentions earth.
Right.
So maybe there, that's other things was there.
Well, there's other things, you know.
Created all of the galaxies.
He created everything at the beginning. In the beginning, when he created the heavens, that's the galaxies. And right in the middle was a place he called Earth, and that's where he put the top of his creation on Earth. So that's the reason why when someone says there's aliens out there, I said, well, if I'm going to follow the Bible, no, there's not. Because it was right here where he put life in his image. You know, so. No, they're like the sun. The sun is a fusion reaction. It's actually generating heat on its own. It's hydrogen. Yeah, but yeah, I'm planning to be here to watch that, you know, but yeah.
Another thing is, we're dealing with what science makes sense at this moment.
Right. That's another very good point. Very good point.
Because if you go back 100 or 1,000 years ago, science was made up of 4 elements, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
That made perfect sense.
Yes.
That's what everything operated on.
That's right.
That's why you bleed somebody when they were sick.
That's right. No, you're right.
Balanced and all. But we think we're so smart, and we're really not.
No.
I think if the Lord tarries, or when we get to the other side, after the Lord comes, it'll be an aha moment.
Yeah.
You know,
What?
our source of knowledge is so
Limited.
limited. I mean, you know, scientists think he's so smart he is. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't conceive of the numbers, but none of us can.
Well, have you ever heard the story that they say that on the earth they've been looking for the lost city of Atlantis? And they claim that when they find it, that civilization was far more advanced than we are. And see, and archaeology has shown that there's things that were made back hundreds of years ago or 1,500 years ago that they've discovered, you know, in places and stuff. For example, the pyramids. How in the world they build that? So what they're surmising was somebody came out of space and did it. Here's my theory. Okay, if Adam and Eve are with God, and they're talking with God every night, what are they talking about? And they're naming the plants and the trees. And somebody said Eve did it because when you take the names that you get in Greek and Latin, this species is Epicamacaragatus, you know, and you're thinking, what in the world? You know, but she knew all the species. They were more intelligent in that garden than we are today. And the minute they sinned, they began to digress. All right. The cavemen were wearing basically what kind of clothing? Animal skins and stuff. So I have no problem saying that man digressed so far. And when you look at how they moved out from the Garden of Eden quit existing. They had to survive because the curse was, you know, by the sweat of their brow, they have to be able to eat. And you had people that learned how to eat food. That's where okra started being eaten because they didn't have nothing to eat. I mean, I got it all figured out. I got it all, but I'm just theorizing, okay? I just have to throw that in there. But listen to this. You had gatherers, and then you had people that did learn how to eat certain things. But you kept moving away from the garden. You got more and more far from God, the knowledge of how to survive and the knowledge of the universe change. And that's why if you heard what I said in Romans this morning, what did they turn to? They looked at the creation, and instead of saying, well, God made this, because now they don't believe in God, they looked at the creation and worshiped the creation and the things in creation because their knowledge of God got worse and less and less. And when they did that, they came up with their own understanding why they felt the way they felt, the emptiness they felt, the loneliness they felt. So that several generations, which Adam lived to be 900-something years, and you start looking at the years, you can see how by the time you get to the flood, it's a complete chaos. And only 8 people were saved, you know. So from a biblical standpoint, Mark, getting back to your question, I would use some things. If they are interested, I would start with that. And there again, I can't prove it scientifically, but I know this time is relative. Relative to what man says. He set the standards. And then when I was over here at Aiken Tech doing the nuclear stuff, they talked about radioactive materials. It decays from one level of atomic weight down to another one. And one can go to a radioactive isotope. Well, anyway, the difference between carbon-14 and carbon-12, to get from carbon-14 and carbon-12 and it decays, there's a certain time lapse it doesn't change. So they came up with the bright idea, let's go dig up rocks and sticks and anywhere we can find carbon in there, let's see how much carbon-12 there is and how much carbon-14. And by that, we can determine how old this rock and stick is. You know what the error rate on that is? About 45%. That's a pretty big thing. But they went ahead and chose that standard because carbon is one of the building blocks of life. And they chose that standard. And then when I got to reading it, I said, well, how accurate is that? Once again, that's man's attempt to come up, how did I get here and how long has it been? So when someone tells you and says, well, this is the way it happened and it was a big bang and all this, I said, were you there? Well, what's the answer? No. Who told you that? Well, the PhD told me that. I said, well, you can get a post-hole digger degree anywhere. I said, and you're taking man's knowledge. Well, you got to have to believe this. I said, it needs more faith to believe what you believe.
That's right.
It's the same thing. So since they're both faith principles, the laws of what science we do know, you take something, you measure it from previous standards, you repeat the process over and over, get the same results over and over, then you finally say, yep, that's silver, or that's gold because it's reacting to the other elements that we know about. So that's that, quantitative and qualitative analysis in chemistry. I had to take all that stuff. And when you start, see, when I was taking all that stuff, God wanted me to take it because he knew I'd live long enough into a world where people ask questions. And I can't give them all the answers, but I can say this. If you believe everything those people tell you, then, and you can't prove it scientifically, then you got a choice to make. I said it this morning. You either believe this or you believe that. I have chose to believe this.
Proving it biblically is a lot better than proving it scientifically.
Well, you don't have to prove it. You just have to accept it by faith, and then it will, as time tells, I think like Finley was saying, as time gets down there, it'll be an aha moment. And they're finding out aha moments all along. I don't want to get complicated, but I'll tell you this. There's a new science, and it came with Einstein, and it's called quantum physics. And in quantum physics, if you read some of their books, you know what they found out? And these are all theories. But from measuring all this stuff, they came to the conclusion that everything began with sound. Sound. That's how the creation was. And said there was chaos, but then they said at the microscopic, well, not even quantum level, there's a grid that's been put off of this to calm everything down and put it in order. I said, I'm reading Genesis. Out of nothing, God spoke, and then everything came into creation. And so when I read these books, I'm sitting there going, I need an aha moment. There you go. But they see man, coming up with their ideas and so forth. And it comes down to this. You believe what men tell you? Do you know that up until 100-something years ago, they said time was a constant, and it never changed. And then Einstein comes along, and what did he say? If you go fast enough and go in a circle fast enough, time never moves. And if you go the speed of light, that's why he said MC, 186,000 is the mass times the speed of light squared. You can actually be stationary and time never moves. That was his theory of relativity. Well, and I didn't understand until I saw somebody put it in motion, had a kid on a bicycle, and he kept going faster and faster and faster, and it looked like the kid wasn't even moving. So man says time is a constant. And then man had to admit, no, if you're traveling pretty fast, get in it. What happens if you travel to California in a jet? You leave here at 9 o'clock? Go through the time changes? When you get over there, it might be 8:30 if your jet is flying at 500 or something, And if you could go do what? If you can go fast enough. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. And science, just to me, because I look at both of them, it just proves my Bible over and over. And I can't come in a laboratory and tell people there's a God and all this stuff. I can tell them what I've experienced and what he says, and the heavens declare his glory. And I go back to what, like Finley said, there'll be aha moments. And I've had those aha moments reading through science and studying it. And so it just makes me more committed to this. I've got to make a choice. Because if I follow evolution says there is no God. It does. That's what it says. So if there's no God, who's going to make decisions about who lives, who dies, and whatever else? And what's happening? Abortion's legal. Why? It's not that important. Christian says what? It's not. Shouldn't be accepted. It's human life created in the image of God. It's sacred. You see what I'm getting at? They're going to have to make decisions one day about us and how much money do we get to keep us alive. Quality of living. They're doing it right. And so who makes that? Well, evolution says survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. Get rid of if they're not contributing and they're costing too much, it's okay to get rid of them. Hitler thought that way. Where did he get all his thoughts from? These Germans in the 18th century who came up with all these ideas. It said the Bible is not, you can't trust it. Tried to rip, World War, up here in Aiken University. I went there before I got my first church. I started college there. I went from Aiken Tech to there. And long story short, we had to write a paper, So I wrote a paper on that. And I said, and my subject was that the German paid a high price for their challenging the validity of God's word, And I documented and everything, 7 or 8 pages long. And he came up to me when he was handing the papers out. He said, my years as a professor, I've never had anybody. I said, and no preachers in your class. He said, no, but this, you got a point. He says, right after that, Germany, went down. And then, of course, they went down in World War II. And even the nations that supported them, the Ottoman Empire after World War I, they supported Germany. They got wiped out. And so everybody that followed that, it's almost like God said, go ahead and play your games, but there's a payday someday. And I put that in my paper. And anyway, it got his attention. I got a grade, so I couldn't complain. But anyway, getting back to this, I think the simple answer, like Mark said, these people, if you don't have enough information, if you just simply say, well, what you believe scientifically, you have to accept by faith. Because a lot of the science about how we got here, the creation story for as far as they go, how we started, is all theory. It's not scientifically true. So you got to believe something. See, I have to believe this. So what is the end results if you follow their belief versus your belief? And we can see what's happening now as the nation has pulled away from God and went to evolutionary theory. It's messed us up because people don't believe in God, and when they don't believe in God, they have no purpose for living, and human life becomes valueless. Is that a simple way? So, why teach this stuff? I taught it in college when I did my religion classes, and people said, we've never heard this stuff. I said, I keep it simple because it's the truth. You either believe this or what they believe. If you believe what they did, you're going to pay a price for it. And that we're paying the price for it now. All right, the seventh day, God rested. What do you think when it means rested? And what's your understanding of what did God do on that day?
He didn't say nothing.
Huh?
He didn't say nothing.
He didn't say anything, but what when you see God resting, what pops in your head?
He enjoyed what he had created.
Okay. Enjoy what he did. All right. Let me throw something at you. Maybe it was all completed. So what does that say about creation now? New species and things like that. They're all the time saying we're evolving, so new species are popping up. Well, have we been to every inch of the earth now? No. Have we been to every inch of the bottom of the ocean? No. Have we been to every forest on the earth? No. Man still has a lot of area he's never touched his foot on. Okay? That being said, that's right. It's already created. And you say, well, what about the extinction? Well, sin says death is in the world. And Paul says in Romans 8 that the whole creation just can't hardly wait for his second coming because he'll recreate. So species are dying. The human race to me is more extinct right now because animals are preserved above us. But the point I'm getting at with all of this is that creation itself is not continuing. In other words, there's not a new animal popping up somewhere. There's animals dying, but you not go out here and find a Guadalupeus and say, what is that? And say, well, I've never seen an animal like that before. It just evolved into that. It came from this and that. It may look like this and that, but it's not either one. It's a creature that God created in the beginning. Dinosaurs were here. We know that from the evidence. The Bible speaks about them, different words. So I have no problem with science pointing out stuff, but I can go to my Bible, and there again, when the areas I can't answer, I have to have faith. They have to do the same. And they don't want to admit that. Oh, evolution is true. No, it's not. It's a lie. And the ultimate goal was to convince men that you're just on your own, and you've got to make decisions on how this world operates. Climate change is out of evolutionary theory. They created that to tax the people, to redistribute wealth, and it's a lie. The earth has always been cycling in temperatures because the sun cycles. That's a major cause of weather patterns. Earthquakes and volcanoes do that. So all this stuff, when you read it, you begin to see it's a hoax, but it's man. I'm in control of my universe now. Since I'm evolving into something better, I've got to make decisions because survival of the fittest depends on me. And the trouble is, people of faith said, no, it depends on God. He created the heavens and the earth. See? All right, now, he said, let us, in chapter 1 at the end of chapter, let us make men in our image. Oh, by the way, the word rest. Let me throw something at you. Maybe, I don't know if you've heard this before. I probably said it and maybe I can't remember it, but the word rest means to cease from one activity. And if you cease from one activity, it means with God, he's not motionless. He never slumbers, nor does he sleep. So if he ceases from creation, what is his next agenda, since he's a God who's fully aware of his creation and he's working? What was the next thing he started on that day when he rested? Salvation. He creates man. He already knows what's coming. And already he puts into human history the plan of salvation. Already knows how it's going to play out. Knows he's going to make a visit to this earth to save us. And so when it says he rested, it doesn't mean he propped up his big number 10s and said, he said it was good. In fact, when you look at the Hebrew text of it, every time he said it was good, it's like an artist that finishes a masterpiece. When he signs his name to it, that's his way of saying, I want to claim credit for this. So when you see the Hebrew word God, it's the same word that implies, like an artist, his work is complete and his name is on it. So the heavens declare what? The glory of God. Can't see God? Look at the universe. There he is. And we're living in a time with with telescopes and stuff, we can see stuff that previous generations could never see that are out there. All right. He said, make God in what? Did that ever get you going when it said our?
There was somebody else there.
Who was it? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thought. Huh? Well, we're different than the angels, so we're not created in their image. Most scholars believe that when it refers to our, this is the first introduction that God's Spirit and Christ and God the Father, all three in one, are being implied with the plural. And it's in the Hebrew, it's in the plural form, in our image. But they're all three in one, so, when Christ came to earth, he came as a human being. So far as us seeing God here on earth, he came as one of us. And we'll get into all that later. According to what? Our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. That includes South Carolina mosquitoes. Y'all agree with that? And God created the world. He created mosquitoes. Yeah, wouldn't that be something, Mark? And we're not going to be concerned with it in heaven, but I've always imagined that there'll be a debriefing room. Like if you go on a mission in the military, they have a debriefing moment to explain to you what just happened and how good it turned out. I just wonder if heaven's got these debriefing rooms with signs over them. Did you want to know why I made the mosquito or the gnat? Mark's in there in the front row. Yeah, play that film. I want to see that, And it comes across on the first thing, to aggravate a guy by the name of Mark Whittle. That's the only reason why I made it. Just for that reason. Everybody, in fact, I'm the only one sitting in the theater watching this movie. Everybody else is.
Why don't let the devil create them so that we would cut?
Well, if you... And there again, with my limited knowledge of, ecological systems and stuff, if you look how everything's are, for example, when they took the wolf out of some places, it messed up the food chain. Coyotes was the same thing. They introduced those back into South Carolina. Yeah, they're getting kind of out of hand. But my point is, all of them have a purpose. This one eats that one, and so forth and so on. And in the insect world, it's the same thing. Mosquitoes can pass parasites and viruses or whatever, but they have because some animals are vulnerable to that, and to control those populations, the mosquitoes can do that, take them out. We're one of them if we get around an area, swampy area. South Carolina, what was it? Low country area, every spring, summer. The folks that could left Charleston and moved upper part of the state. Limestone College. It was created for people in Charleston so the kids could continue school, and they moved up there. And then Hendersonville and all those places, a lot of them were the rich folks down here. Summerville, where, we had our church, Summerville was the same thing. It was called Summer because they believed if they came to where all the pines were, with the pine straw, the mosquitoes were not as bad. Well, it's higher ground. It's a little bit drier in the forest. But if it rains a lot, you still get mosquitoes, because I lived in there and did that. So, purposes for all these things, going to be aha moments for sure. What if you get to heaven and the room's full of mosquitoes, And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay? Now, when we get to chapter 2, it's different. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. The image is if you were to create a rubber stamp of something, so you could, this is a replica of who you are in the spiritual sense. The image has a spiritual, so it means that's your soul. So we were created with spiritual, what we call souls, nature, because God is spirit. Remember in John it says, Jesus says, God is spirit. You must worship him in what? Spirit and truth. So in his image means that we're the only things he created that has an understanding and awareness of God. And in the Garden of Eden, it was perfect worship. When sin entered in, that relationship was broken as far as a physical, 5 senses, being with God, seeing God, talking with God. That got broken. But we still have that. So man, with that image marred by sin, now has got to worship something or someone. And you read the Bible, you see that's true. You got people that worship things, creatures, universe, themselves. But it's a direct relationship that before the fall, because we had that image, God could walk with us in the garden, and Adam and Eve could talk to him face to face without fear of dying, without God getting mad. They had a one-on-one relationship. God passed the universe, the knowledge down to him, and so forth. There was no disease, no sickness, none of that. But our spiritual nature is what's meant by that. The likeness kind of looks forward to when God reveals himself, that he comes as a human being. When Christ left, he left looking like a human being. The angel said in Acts, when he comes back, this same Jesus will come back. So when we see him, we'll see him in that likeness. We'll be able to recognize him because we recognize each other. We'll recognize him. What are you going to do when we see Jesus and he doesn't have the same color hair that you always grew up with? What about his skin color? What are you looking for? We can only imagine because we have no portraits except what artists have deemed. And that came, by the way, from one little piece of information that one of the spies of the Roman Empire, observing him, made some comments about what he looked like and what his demeanor was. And I think it was Josephus who made reference to that. And from that, the Renaissance started painting pictures later on, and they painted pictures of that. But we don't know. But we do know when he left, who stuck their hand in his side? Thomas. They touched him, saw the scars. He looks in that form, but yet God is spirit. So, image and likeness. No. What color eyes is he going to have, And if he, if we read Revelation, he's got fire in his eyes, and his feet are like bronze. Of course, those are figurative explanations. But 1 John 3:1 says, when we see him, we'll be like him. There's that word like in his likeness. The scripture will interpret itself. And then we have to kind of fill in the gaps, But this is important because if we're creating his image and we have a soul, when he created Adam, what did it say he did? He breathed into Adam what? Breath of life. Do you know the word breath is the same word where you see the word spirit here? Ruah, which means God himself. In the New Testament's pneuma, but it has a direct reference. This is God's spirit. So we're the only creature where God put his mouth, the way the Bible tries to explain it, over us, didn't give us CPR because we never had lived, and put a spirit, a soul in human beings. Love dogs, love my pets, but they're animals. If they had a soul this morning, some of them would have been in here, sitting up here, barking the songs and being with us. They don't gather, That's a silly way of looking at it, but it's the truth. He created man in his own image. Let's go to the next verse. Said God blessed them, and God said to them, what? Be what? Fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. When you think about it, he gave us stewardship. He put us in charge. But notice this. This is the first command in the Bible. When you see the bee, it's called an imperative, which is, and you be. This is what I want you to do. And I have designed you to do that. Male, female, you complement each other. And physically, I've given you the opportunity to share and recreating life by the way I designed you. Now, for God to be able out of dust to create a human being, and then he turns to his creation and says, you want to experience what I've experienced when I made you? I made you because I wanted someone to love and someone to share my universe with. And I'm giving you a command that if you really want to enjoy this life on earth, I'm giving you the opportunity. Now, you got to keep in mind, this is before sin. Sin, came in disease and things. Some people can't have children and all this stuff, but you can adopt kids. But what he's saying is, this is my design. A man and a woman, biologically similar, but distinctly different. But together, y'all create and can create and share in the creative process of bringing people in this world. What did man do with that today? How do we look at that? We distort it. We try to dehumanize the situation. We try to make it sinful by, portraying it as, as not true relationships and stuff like that. It's just basically on lust. And sin's done that, but God's original design was for a man and a woman. And when you read the Old Testament, what did they do? They had multiple wives and multiple children. And then look at all the problems that followed it. This was his intent. And he says he wanted us to multiply and fill the earth. How many people do you think the earth can handle, population-wise? What have you heard people say? Okay. So, it's over 8 billion. They said by the 2050s, it'd be like 9 or 10 billion. If the Lord tarries. That's a lot of people, isn't it? There was a guy by the name of Malthus, out of this evolutionary stuff, at the turn of the from the 1900s. His name was Malthus. He mathematically came up with an equation. And he came up with this number, that the earth can handle 200 million people and be sustainable. 200 million. That was his number. Oh, yeah. But that was his theory. And he supported the evolutionists. So, the numbers were higher then. Hitler comes into power. He reads all this stuff. And so, he wanted a perfect race of people. Because there again, evolution says there's only one perfect race, So he took their racist thoughts and decided he'd get rid of certain people, call them vermin, Jews. Why did he want to get rid of the Jews? They controlled a lot of the wealth in Europe, a lot of the businesses and stuff. They were not part of the Christian faith and so forth. He had his reasons, sadistic. But my point is, there's people who want to depopulate the earth, but they want to be selective. So the lady Margaret Sanger, that created an organization that your taxes pay for now. That talks about what's it called? Planned Parenthood. Doesn't that sound nice? Planned Parenthood. Go back and study her. You know what her agenda was? To get rid of people who had any physical disabilities, deformities, to get rid of people who had black skin, to get rid of people who had yellow skin, to get rid of, and that was her agenda. And that's why she created Planned Parenthood. And she knows she wasn't shy about it. You can read her documents. And so then they started taking these people that were, maybe they had, for the loss of words, some kind of deformity, and keeping them from getting married. And so what they did was basically come in and make them sterile so they couldn't have kids. I mean, this was supported by the government. Yes. And this is what Hitler did. Hitler did it from the extremes of putting them on buses and gassing them, because he said, I want pure Germany. This comes out of evolution. That's why I am so vocal and outpouring. Most people sit there, dude, it's science. No, it's not. It's a trick of hell to take science and distort it, to go against God's design and to kill human beings. Now, the last time I rode through the bomb plant, that's what they call it, and took 125 out the other side and hit Highway 3 to Estill. There's some places there's not even power lines there. There's thousands and thousands of South Carolina land. I went to Georgia to do a memorial service for someone, and we were driving in South Georgia, south of Louisville. And we were going, and I looked up and said, there's no power poles here. I mean, for 15, 20 miles, no power poles. And it's just land. And then it dawned on me, we've been lied to. I mean,
You fly from here to L.A., there's a lot.
it's like, all right, and we're just one country. And they say there's plenty. My bottom line is this. There are agendas to depopulate the earth. But for who? The elite, those who think they know it all. They want the earth for themselves. So what do? They use fear to scare us. They throw a little science in it, kind of mix up a witch's brew, throw it out into the public and say, if you don't do this and do that and drive electric cars and all this stuff such and such a time, you're going to depopulate the earth is not going to survive. Well, if you're worried about depopulating the earth, why you allow abortion, and why are you talking about euthanasia, and why do you release viruses into the air deliberately to get rid of us? I'm not tricked by you. Okay, so we were created in His image. We're supposed to multiply. Now, don't go out and have 15 kids. And there's only one young couple in here tonight that's trying to reach that standard. Kenny's looking around with his eyes. I mean, if you want to have 15 kids, that's fine. But don't come to us saying, I ain't got nothing to eat. I said, well, you should have thought about that. I'm just joking, of course. Our ancestors, how many of you were born in a big family? I only had 2 brothers. Anybody had 10 or more? Did you have 10 in your family? Oh, Lord. But what I heard from some of my ancestors talking before they died, they didn't know what was causing it. That was the problem. But I've heard some of them say we needed more farm hands. Because when you were born, Gail's mom and her granddaddy, but her mom, they had 2 sets of twins, and they had 10, so we got the twin gene in our family. My granddaughter's getting married in September, and she said, I don't know if I want to have kids. I think those doubles hadn't showed up yet. And she said, I know it's going to show up in my generation. I said, well, it might. And they made it. When you put God first, you can do this. All right, we'll pick up with this next week, Genesis 1 and 2, the comparison between the two. This is interesting, some of this stuff. So, but anyway, any questions before we quit? Anybody got any? Like we're doing now? Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that. And
About time, I have a stupid question.
What's that?
On Gunsmoke, when they look at their pocket watch,
Mm-hmm.
how did they set the time to know what time it was?
No, that's
They
a,
didn't ask Alexa. They didn't have. Did they just go by the sun and guess it, or
well,
there wasn't no Denver
The
atomic?
other day I was out waking and I looked at the sun and I said, oh, it looks like it's getting about 4 o'clock.
But I mean that changes throughout the seasons, the angles and stuff. But every time I see Doc Adams look at his watch, I said, where did he get the time to set his watch?
well, by the time you get to the Western days,
That's
you know,
gonna be one of them aha moments.
well, no, by the time you get to the Western days and, of course, telegraph came in and stuff like that, back east, you know, if you go to the Washington, D.C., in the archives, they've got the standards and near there. There's a building called the National Archives. Well, there's a building called the Standard of Weights and Measurements and even Time. And there's a thing called atomic time. I have a clock beside my bed. It gets the time off that. And the other night when the time changed, I was trying to change it, and I just couldn't remember how to change it. So I just set it there. 2 days later, it reset itself.
Well, I know that comes. I know.
You know.
They didn't have that then.
I'd go to bed and it said 12 o'clock, and it was really, no, they didn't. But listen to this. Man, that's what we were saying a while ago. It's relative to what people tell you and what they mark time with. All right. I know y'all have read this. The ships of old, how did they know to go from one spot to another and where they were on the ocean? Well, some of them used the stars. But then they came up with this clock. And I forget the name of it. It's monochronometer meter or something. But it's time. And that thing would mark time. And they knew how fast they were sailing based on longitude and latitude. You know, they could shoot stars and get that. But how fast were they traveling? Well, that's why they charted everything. But the trouble with those things were if they got too far north, the polar thing would change that clock. And they'd be way off course. And this kept happening and happening. And, of course, you know, they got GPS system now. But you ought to read up on it. So time, they began to realize, was relative to what instrument you had, and it could get out of whack. And these things were on all the wooden ships, and they were used to mark distances between longitude. No, it's a good thing. But once I learned, I'll tell you this, once I learned how science operates and what true science is and what theories are, because it was Marshall Dillon set the time. Yeah.
I have one question.
Yeah.
The time, but yesterday on the news, they said this stingray was pregnant, and they think it's by a shark. Is that something?
They told you that, didn't they?
That was on the news.
Well, let's see when the shark has babies what it looks like. And I hear sharks every day when we keep our great-grandson. You know that shark song? Mama shark, do-do-do-do. I go to sleep sometime I'm hearing do-do-do-do-do. Yeah, some people do. All right. We'll quit for tonight. I know y'all anxious to get home and watch Super Bowl, but I could. But that's another story. We'll pick up where we left off. We'll take our time. It may take us a good long time to get through this. I like your questions because, you know, there's things y'all bring up that, you know.
Was it not something about the first books of the Bible that they thought God was so holy they didn't call him Jehovah? That's why.
Right. That's in the Hebrew. And it was the commandment that said, don't take God's name in vain. Well, the rabbinical teachers expanding the law said, all right, what does that mean? What can you do to take God's name in vain? The extreme thing would be that when you said the name, you just said it, God. You know, you hear me tone in my voice. What's that?
So many Christians say, oh my
God.
And that to me is taking the name.
Well, it's putting God in a vain sense that, you know, it's just your expression and you bring him into it. You know, it's like I played golf and a lot of people. One day I got put with this guy and he cussed like a Marine sailor and Air Force. I'll put him in there. And he was cussing up a storm. And you know, God's name in vain and everything. And when he found out it was the preachers, when at the turn, he said, you want some more beer? And I said, I don't drink. He said, well, wait a minute, I got a question for you. You hadn't said one cuss word. And I've been cussing all the time. And he said, I know you don't get mad. And I said, well, I'm mad, but I just ain't showing it. And he said, because I wasn't playing good, but he said, and you don't drink. He said, if I didn't know any better, I think you was a preacher. And I said, I am. And he, you know what he said? He said, I want to apologize to you for taking God's name in vain. And I said, well, you need to apologize to him because it wasn't my name. So I don't try to correct people. I just say, hey, look, when you use that, I don't like to hear it and stuff like that. But instead of me trying to correct them, I simply, get an opportunity. I say, and I told some guys one day, all of them was doing that. I was playing with it. And I said, what I realized about all of you, here you are. They were seniors, older than me. And I said, y'all didn't have much vocabulary training when y'all came. I've noticed that all your words have 4 letters or less. One of them was a judge. He was a judge, and they got on to him. He's 90-something years old, barely could walk, playing golf, and he was God this and God that. Huh?
He was playing with Bible.
I think it was. And they said, preacher, he said, now he cusses real bad. I said, that's all right. I can handle that. I don't have virgin ears. I've heard them all. And so sure enough, we were with him, and somebody said to the judge, you need to calm it down. We got a preacher with that group. And then he rattled off a bunch of more words. And I said, forget it, But anyway, all right, let's go, and we'll talk next week. Father, we thank you for this time today, and we thank you, Lord, for your Spirit being among us. Thank you for the new people that have been in our midst. And we know that every time one person comes, that they have more people they know. And Lord, we just pray for the outpouring of your Spirit to be in our community, and so that we can be a part of your kingdom's work of drawing them to you, because that's our purpose for being here. Keep us aware of that each and every week when we gather, so that as we gain knowledge from your word of who you are and what our purpose is, we'll be active, encouraging people to have a relationship with you. Now, Lord, once again, I just lift up a prayer for this person whose family lost a loved one last night. Don't know the situation, don't know the circumstances, but for the 3 people in the car that happened to, I know it's bothered them. And Lord, things like that, when I come across them, I just lift up a prayer and pray for them that, Lord, out of this, something good will happen. But until we meet again Wednesday, we just ask your blessings in Christ's name. Amen. Yeah. They still have